When my daughter-in-law looked at me on my son's wedding day and said, "You can sit at the back. This row is for close family," I smiled instead of crying. I do not know why I smiled. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was years of learning how to swallow feelings quietly. Or maybe it was because I did not want to ruin my son's big day. So I nodded. I took my purse in my hands and I walked slowly to the last row of the hall, where no one noticed me sit down. That was the moment something inside me shifted, not loudly, not suddenly, just a soft crack, like a hairline break in glass. I kept telling myself it was nothing. I told myself I was being sensitive. After all, weddings are busy. People forget things. People say things they do not mean. But deep in my chest, I felt it. This was not just about a seat. This was about where I stood in my son's life now. The music started. Soft piano notes filled the room. Everyone stood up. I stood too. I watched my son walk forward in his dark suit. He looked handsome, confident, different. For a moment, my heart swelled with pride. I remembered the little boy who used to hold my finger when crossing the street, the boy who cried when I left him at school, the boy who used to say, "Mama, don't go." That boy was gone now. The ceremony went on. People laughed at the right moments. Some women wiped tears from their eyes. I sat very still, hands folded, breathing slowly. No one looked back at me, not even my son. And that was when I realized something painful. I was not part of this moment the way I thought I would be. I had imagined this day for years. I imagined sitting in the front row. I imagined my son glancing at me and smiling, just once. I imagined feeling included. Instead, I felt like a guest who arrived too early or too late. As vows were spoken, my mind drifted, not to the future, but to the past. I remembered the day my son was born, the way I held him for the first time. So small, so warm, so completely mine. I remembered sleepless nights, school lunches, fevered foreheads, long talks at the kitchen table. I remembered all the sacrifices that no one ever writes down, the quiet ones, the ones mothers do without expecting anything in return. And I wondered, when did all of that stop mattering? When the ceremony ended, applause filled the hall. People stood up again. Phones were raised. Photos were taken. I stayed seated for a moment longer. I needed time to breathe. Then I stood, slowly, carefully. At the reception, things felt even stranger. The tables were arranged beautifully. Flowers everywhere, soft lights, laughter. I searched for my name on the seating chart. It was there, but far from the main table, far from my son. I told myself again, it's fine, it's just a table. I sat down. People around me were polite, but distant. They talked among themselves. Across the room, I saw my son laughing with his new wife. He looked happy, and that made me happy too. But something else sat heavy inside me, a quiet sadness I could not name. At one point, I walked toward him. I wanted to say something simple, just, "You look wonderful," just, "I'm proud of you." Before I reached him, his wife gently stepped in front of me. "Later," she said softly, "he's busy right now." I nodded, smiled again, stepped back again. No argument, no scene, just silence. I returned to my seat and folded my hands in my lap. They were trembling slightly. I asked myself a question I never thought I would ask. When did I become a stranger in my own son's life? The cake was cut, speeches were made, people clapped. When it was time for parents to be mentioned, my name was said quickly, like a detail, not a story. My heart tightened, but my face stayed calm. I clapped, I smiled, I did everything I was supposed to do. Inside, I felt very small. As the evening went on, I felt more invisible. Conversations stopped when I joined them. People were kind, but not warm. I looked around and realized something else. Everyone belonged somewhere in that room, except me. Near the end of the night, my son passed by my table. He paused for just a second. "Are you okay?" he asked. I looked up at him, at my child, all grown up, standing so far away from me, even though he was right there. "Yes," I said, "I'm fine." And I meant it in the way mothers often mean things. I meant, "I will survive this." He nodded and walked away. That was the last real moment we shared that day. When I got home that night, the house felt too quiet. I took off my shoes. I placed my purse on the table. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, not moving. The wedding clothes hung heavy on my body. The smile I had worn all day slowly faded. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where my son used to do his homework. I rested my hands on the wood, and for the first time that day, I let myself feel it. The sadness, the confusion, the deep, aching realization that something precious had changed. My son was married now, and somehow, in the process, I had been left behind. I did not cry loudly. I did not break down. I just sat there in silence, listening to the clock tick, wondering how a single day could quietly rewrite an entire relationship. That night, I went to bed alone with a question I could not answer yet. Was this just the beginning, or was this the end of the bond I thought would last forever? The family before the wedding. Before my son's wedding, our life was simple, not perfect, but warm. It was just the two of us for a long time. His father passed away when my son was still very young. I never remarried, not because I didn't want companionship, but because my heart was already full. I poured everything into raising my son. Our home was small, but it held laughter, it held routine, it held safety. Every morning I woke before sunrise. I made tea, I packed his lunch, I waited for him to wake up. He used to come into the kitchen with sleepy eyes and messy hair. "Mama, what's for breakfast?" he would say, rubbing his face. Those were ordinary moments, but now I know, ordinary moments are the ones that stay with you the longest. I was strict when I needed to be, gentle when he needed comfort. I tried to be both mother and father. When he fell and scraped his knee, I cleaned the wound and kissed it. When he was scared at night, I sat beside his bed until he slept. When he failed a test, I reminded him that one mistake does not define a life. We talked about everything: school, friends, dreams. At the kitchen table, he once told me, "Mama, when I grow up, I'll buy you a big house." I laughed and said, "I don't need a big house. I just need you to be happy." And I meant it. As he grew older, things changed a little. Teenage years are like that. More silence, more closed doors. But still, we were close. He used to call me from college every evening, sometimes just to say hello, sometimes to complain about food or studies. I never missed those calls. When he brought her home the first time, I was nervous. I cleaned the house twice. I cooked more food than necessary. She stood at the door, polite and well-dressed. She smiled, but her eyes were careful. "This is my mother," my son said proudly. I smiled back and welcomed her in. At first, everything seemed fine. She was respectful, quiet, reserved. I tried to include her. I asked about her family, her work, her interests. She answered politely, but never deeply. When I cooked, she offered help once or twice, but mostly she stayed on her phone or spoke to my son in a low voice. I noticed small things, but I ignored them, because love teaches you patience. When my son told me he wanted to marry her, I was happy for him. I truly was. He looked at me nervously, as if expecting resistance. "Are you okay with this?" he asked. I smiled and held his hand. "If you're happy, I'm happy." That was the truth. From that day on, I tried even. I did not want to interfere. I did not want to be that mother. I gave advice only when asked. I kept my opinions to myself. But something else began to happen. The phone calls became shorter, then less frequent. Sometimes days passed without a message. When I asked if everything was okay, he said, "Yes, Mama, just busy." Busy is a word that can mean many things. I noticed he started sharing less with me. Decisions were already made by the time I heard about them. When they discussed wedding plans, I was informed, not included. The date was set, the hall was booked, the guest list was written. I did not complain. I told myself, this is their life now. Still, there were moments that hurt quietly, like when I suggested inviting a family friend and she said, "We want to keep it small." Or when I offered to help with decorations and she replied, "We already hired someone." Each time I stepped back because I believed love meant giving space. The closer the wedding came, the more distant my son felt. Not rude, not unkind, just elsewhere. Sometimes I would catch him looking at his phone while I spoke. Sometimes he would cut conversations short. I told myself again, this is normal. But at night, when the house was quiet, I felt it. A slow separation, like a thread being pulled, little by little. I never imagined that on his wedding day I would feel like an outsider. I never imagined I would sit at the back of a room and wonder where I belonged. I thought the wedding would be a celebration of family. I thought it would bring us closer. I did not know then that the distance I felt before the wedding was only the beginning, and that after the vows were spoken, after the smiles and photographs, nothing between us would ever feel the same again. The small changes I chose to ignore. After the wedding, life did not fall apart suddenly. There was no loud argument, no harsh words. Things changed quietly, so quietly that I almost convinced myself nothing had changed at all. At first, my son came home less often. When he did, his visits were shorter. He checked the time more. He smiled, but his mind seemed elsewhere. I told myself this was normal. He was married now. He had responsibilities. Still, I missed the way he used to sit in the kitchen and talk without hurry. I missed how he used to ask my opinion on small things. Now, decisions were already made. I heard about them later, sometimes from others. I noticed that when I called, he often did not answer. When he returned my call, his voice sounded rushed. "Mama, I'll call you back," he would say. Sometimes he didn't. I never complained. I never reminded him. I never said, "You forgot." I told myself love should not beg. When I visited their home, I felt like a guest. Not unwelcome, just temporary. I waited to be offered tea. I asked before sitting anywhere. I cleaned up quietly after myself. His wife was polite, always polite, but there was a distance in her eyes, a careful line she never crossed. If I suggested something, she nodded and said, "We'll see." But "we'll see" never meant yes. I noticed she preferred things done her way, her routines, her rules. I respected that. I did not interfere. I did not advise unless asked. Still, something felt heavy.
Once, I brought my son's favorite dish, the one I used to make when he was a child. She smiled and said, "Oh, he doesn't eat this anymore." My son looked at his plate and said nothing. I nodded too, but inside, my heart tightened. I wondered when he stopped liking it and why I was the last to know. On another visit, I suggested we all sit together for dinner. She said, "He already ate." He had not told me. Small moments, small cuts, none of them deep enough to bleed, but together they left a mark. I started choosing my words carefully. I measured my presence. I did not call too often. I did not stay too long. I learned how to excuse myself early. Sometimes, when I was alone, I replayed conversations in my head. I wondered if I said something wrong, if my tone sounded too motherly, if my love felt like pressure. I began to shrink myself. I did not want to be a burden. I did not want to be discussed behind closed doors. My son once said, "You don't have to worry so much, Mama." But worry is something you can't turn off. It grows quietly when love feels uncertain. Festivals came and went. Invitations came late, sometimes not at all. I made excuses for them. They're busy. They forgot. They'll come next time. I believed those excuses because believing them hurt less than the truth. One evening, I overheard something I was never meant to hear. I was standing near the hallway when my son and his wife were talking in the other room. I was not listening on purpose, but voices carry. "She still expects too much," she said. "I need my space." My son replied softly, "She means well." That was all. They did not know I heard. I went back to the kitchen and sat down. My hands felt cold. Expecting too much. I asked myself, what was I expecting? A phone call? A little time? A place in my son's life? That night, I lay awake for hours. I realized something painful. I was slowly being moved out of the center of his world, and no one had told me how to adjust. I did not blame her. I did not blame him. I blamed myself for loving too much, for holding on too tightly, for not knowing when to step back. Still, deep inside, a quiet fear began to grow. If things continued this way, what would be left of us? I did not know then that the hardest moment was still ahead, that everything I had ignored, excused, and softened in my heart was leading toward a day that would finally break the silence. And when that day came, there would be no way to pretend anymore.
The wedding day. The morning of the wedding arrived quietly. No excitement in my house, no laughter. Just me, waking up early, as I always did. I made tea and sat by the window. The sky was pale, almost unsure of itself. I had laid out my clothes the night before, simple, neat, not too much. I did not want to stand out. I did not want to seem demanding. As I got dressed, I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked older than I felt. I thought of my son as a child, how he used to hide behind me when he was scared, how he used to reach for my hand. I whispered a small prayer for him, for happiness, for peace. No one called me that morning, no message, no reminder. I arrived at the hall on my own. People were already there, moving around, laughing, taking pictures. I stood near the entrance for a moment, unsure where to go. No one noticed. Then I saw her. She looked beautiful, calm, confident. I walked toward her with a smile, ready to say something kind. Before I could speak, she said softly, "The front rows are for close family." I nodded, smiled. "You can sit at the back." Her voice was polite, almost gentle. I did not argue.
I walked past rows of chairs until I reached the last one. I sat down carefully. Around me were people I did not know. I told myself again, it's just a seat, but my heart knew better. When the music started, everyone stood. I stood too. I watched my son walk forward. He did not look back. During the ceremony, I focused on my breathing. In, out. I listened to the vows, but my mind kept drifting. I remembered teaching him how to tie his shoes, helping him practice speeches, holding him when life felt heavy. I wondered if he remembered any of that at that moment. When it was time for pictures, families gathered at the front. I waited. No one called me. I stood there for a few seconds longer than necessary. Then I returned to my seat. At the reception, everything felt louder. Music, voices, laughter. I searched for my place. My name was on a table far away. I sat down. People were kind, but busy with their own joy. I watched my son from across the room. He looked happy, and that should have been enough, but there was a sharp loneliness I could not explain. I tried to approach him once, just to tell him he looked handsome. Before I reached him, his wife stepped in front of me. "Later," she said. "He's busy." I nodded. I always nodded. As the night went on, I felt myself disappear. When parents were mentioned in speeches, my name passed quickly, like a detail. I clapped. I smiled. I stayed until it felt appropriate to leave. I did not want to seem ungrateful. When I finally stood up to go, I looked at my son one last time. He was surrounded by people, laughing. I realized something then. He did not need me the way he once did, and maybe he did not notice that I was leaving. I walked out of the hall alone. The night air felt cool. At home, the silence was heavy. I sat at the kitchen table and finally let myself feel the weight of the day. Not anger, not jealousy, just grief. Because something had ended. I did not know yet what would come next, but I knew one thing for certain. The wedding had not just joined two people, it had quietly pushed me aside. The breaking point. After the wedding, days passed without a word. No call, no message. I told myself they were tired. Newlywed life is busy. Still, the silence felt heavier than before. I waited a week before calling my son. When he answered, his voice sounded distant. "Yes, Mama?" I asked how he was. I asked if he was settling in well. He answered politely, briefly. I wanted to tell him how proud I was. I wanted to tell him how much I missed him, but the words stayed in my throat. Before we hung up, I said quietly, I felt a little lost at the wedding. There was a pause. He sighed. "Mama," he said, "you're overthinking. Everything was fine." That is when I realized something important. My feelings did not fit into his new life. A few days later, she called me. Her voice was calm, careful. She said, "We should talk." I agreed. They invited me over the following Sunday. I dressed neatly. I brought fruit. I arrived on time. We sat in the living room. My son sat beside her, not beside me. She spoke first. "I want to set some boundaries," she said. The word felt heavy. She explained how they needed space, how I should call before visiting, how I should not expect to be involved in every decision. I listened. I nodded. Then she said something that changed everything. "I need you to understand," she continued. "He has his own family now." Her words were not loud, but they landed hard. I looked at my son. He did not meet my eyes. I realized then I was no longer family in the way I thought. I smiled gently and said, "I understand," but inside, something broke. I stood up slowly. "I won't stay long," I said. My son finally looked at me. "You don't have to go," he said. But it was too late. I walked to the door. Before leaving, I turned back. "I only ever wanted to belong," I said softly. No one answered. At home that night, I packed away old photos, baby pictures, school memories. I placed them in a box. I did not throw them away. I just needed space to breathe. That night, I cried for the first time since the wedding. Not loudly, not bitterly, just quietly, because something had ended. I did not know yet what would come next, but I knew one thing for certain. The wedding had not just joined two people, it had quietly pushed me aside.